If you're planning on using the standalone version of Vue, which in most cases is unavoidable, just because sometimes some of the rendering elements, gbuffers may not work, so you may have to switch over to the standalone to render them, or just to edit specific objects and maybe see an ecosystem a little bit better. You'll probably end up with multiple cameras in your scene, and since xStream really only displays one camera at a time, and that information is not transferred over, where we see our main camera, if you were to have a scene, view scene with multiple cameras, the camera that is active at the time it's saved is the camera that will show up within Cinema. So if we need to create multiple cameras and access them within the standalone and get them to match, we actually need to use the Vue Sync plugin. This plugin comes with xStream on the installation disk. You'll find a folder for it, and there's one for every program, every host application that xStream is compatible with. So once you load that in, you will find a plugin called Vue Sync. First, what we need are some cameras. So let's go ahead and create a couple of cameras. And we'll create 4. I'm going to name these Camera 1 and Camera 2, 3, and 4. And just go ahead and manipulate these throughout the scene. Get some different angles. So now we can see all of our cameras. Actually, I'll go ahead and move 1 or 2 of these to the other side so they're not all facing the same direction. And now we can see these 4 new cameras we have. So if I'm go over and open the scene in standalone view, these cameras are not going to show up, and they're not going to be available. And this is rather unfortunate because it's actually kind of a step back. In Vue 6 xStream, cameras and lights were all equally matched and synced back and forth between the 2 programs. You'd create a light in either program and it would show up in the other one. So in a way it is sort of a step back. So now we really have to know how to manage this and how to be able to view through the cameras that we have available in Cinema in case we need to make modifications. Now, keep in mind, editing the cameras in Vue is not going to change them in Cinema. It's just so that we can get a placement and an idea of where they're at in the scene, in case we need to take a look at any specific elements. In this case, we have our terrain, which is higher detail. We might need to see that higher detail within the standalone in order to be able to place certain objects or make modifications. And once again, using the ecosystem selector is also only available within the standalone. So in order to match these cameras, what we first need to do is make a couple of new ones. What we can do is just, with the main camera selected, click on the store camera 4 times, and that's going to create camera 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we get to use the Vue Sync plugin. The Vue Sync plugin is really useful. It also transfers animation. So if you need to transfer over any keyframes over to your cameras, that is also available. And we'll take a look at that in a sec. So first what we need to do is switch back over to Cinema. Now what we can do is I'm just hitting V on the keyboard, and I have my plugins. You could also go up to the top, select plugins, and if ViewSync is in your plugin folder, it will show up. Now by default, we see that we have one frame, duration of 0. This amount, if you are going to be transferring animation information, is actually defined within the render settings. So we'll open up our render options for Cinema, and under output, the frame range from and to are what define the synchronization info. So if we had a 90-second or 90 frame animation, we would need to set this to 90 frames to transmit all of that animation information over. So what we'll do is select ViewSync, and it gives us an option to select all the cameras and lights in the scene. And if I go ahead and create a cube, we're not going to see that available because this was designed to transfer camera and light information. What we can do is select the object we would like to synchronize, camera 1 through 4. We have the option to export the data as a file or just to hit synchronize. And now if we go back to view, we'll immediately see a pop-up that says, a new synchronization file is available. Would you like to load the synchronization data? And click yes. Now, at this point, it hasn't done anything. We still need to assign this placement data to the objects in the scene. And at any time we make modifications to the cameras, we can export that sync data and get it to work. There's another really important thing before we move on. And what we need to do is go to the Aspect tab with the main camera selected. And actually, it's in the Motion tab, which is the third tab, last tab to the right. And what we have is the non-switchable camera mode that is on by default. In order to get this to work and to save with the scene, the main thing is it will work, but it won't save these other cameras with the scene if this is turned on. So what you need to do is turn off the non-switchable camera, so you can now create switcher keyframes if you want to switch back and forth between your cameras. But unless that option is off, none of these cameras, camera 1, 2, 3, and 4, will be saved with the view scene. So we now need to go through our cameras, and we can use these little arrows to activate the camera. So we'll go to camera 1, and under motion, we also need to make sure we turn off these switcher keyframes for all of the cameras. The main camera is the most important one to have that turned off on, but just to make sure that everything works correctly, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off on all of them. Okay, so we'll switch over to camera 1, and under motion, the last option is synchronized. And we can see that we now have synchronized with and the list of everything we exported. Our scale right now is currently set to 50. This scale is a vector multiplier, and I'm going to stick with 50 for now, and that should be appropriate, but we'll have to see if we have to make changes to it. So what we do is the camera 1, select camera 1, move to our next camera, synchronized, camera 2, sync with camera 3, and it looks like we may need to change the scale. Camera 4. So now we can move through camera 1, 2, 3, and 4 and have that exact data. Now it does look like the scale is slightly off. So what I'm going to do is just take a look in Cinema really quick, and the scale is probably going to end up being 10. And we're just going to use this as a reference, just kind of looking at where the cameras are at. And I really do think it's going to be 10, so let's go ahead and try that. And we'll select the camera, set the scale to 10, and that looks correct. So that is going to automatically change the scale of all of the synchronizations. There's another thing I want to note, and that is only the active camera will show basically the bounds and where it's looking, where we have the outside viewable area of the camera. Only the active camera will show that in the view. So now to keep this data with the file, what we can do is save and then close this out. And now we can reload the scene from file. And I did have camera 3 selected before I made the switch and before I saved. I didn't go back to the main camera. So we can see that camera 3 is now the active camera. It's really not a good idea to change this within Cinema. All I've done is crash it by trying it. In case in the future that is modified and that bug is fixed, what you can do is select the camera, right mouse click and go to the object properties, and then you might be able to go to the camera manager, either that or edit the object and go to the camera manager to select a camera. Right now I'm not really going to do that until I finish up this section. Then we can go ahead and do it and probably crash the program. But for right now, we're going to go back and open the scene in standalone view, hopefully not causing any problems. Switch this back to the main camera. And it does look like we might have lost some of our data. So it looks like camera 1 and camera 2 and the main camera are all in the same place now. Let's go ahead and resync this and just see if we can get that back. So I was able to get this working before, and I have used it quite a few times without any problems. So it's probably just because I had the wrong camera selected. So first what I'm going to do is just save it the way it is, close it out, reload the scene from file, main camera. Now we're going to run, going back to open scene in standalone view, then we're going to run ViewSync again. Select camera 1 through 4, synchronize, close that out. We're going to select yes to load the synchronization data. And now go through our cameras. And it looks like we actually caused even more of a problem this time. Okay, so if we go back through and click on, just re-click on the synchronize with, then it is updating the cameras. Okay, so now we're going to go back and just make sure everything looks right. With the main camera selected, save the scene, close it out, file, reload scene from file. And hopefully that those cameras will stay available. Now mainly that's just for previewing our cameras from Cinema within the standalone version, because modifying those cameras will not change the scene. These cameras are independent from view. So let's go ahead and see if that worked. Hopefully it did. And this time it looks even worse. So actually what we need to do is just reload the synchronization data just by clicking with the motion tab under synchronized. Just move to that camera and click on the one you want to synchronize with, and it automatically re-updates it. So really that's not that big of a problem at all. So now if you need to make any modifications and you really want to see from those custom camera angles within Cinema, you can now access that information, and even the motion. So like I said, you could set that frame amount, and let's just go ahead and do that really quick before we take a look at the compatibility options of rendering with different cameras in Cinema. Might as well just save it, and we'll reload. And it looks like I was on camera 1. That should be alright. We're going to select camera 4, and we're going to create a 90 frame animation. So we're going to create a keyframe 0, move over to 90, create a keyframe, modify the camera, just making a little bit of an animation, nothing special. And it looks like I need to rekey that. And that's one thing I tend to forget because I'm used to using auto keyframing, but I currently have that turned off. So we just have a little bit of animation here. We're going to go to the render options, set our output to 90 frames. And we're going to go back and open the scene in standalone view. And now we have camera 4. And we are going to go to our plugin, view sync. And now we can also see that we have 2 camera 1s because of having the wrong camera selected before. I'm just going to synchronize camera 4. Close that. This might reset the entire synchronization file. We'll have to take a look and see. So now we have camera 4, we can select it, and it does look like we are going to need to select every camera if we're going to be using them. Set our scale to 10, and now we can see the timeline on the bottom where we have our 2 keyframes, and we can play that animation. So we can easily retrieve animation that way, since animation is not stored for objects within view. So anytime you want to see any of the motion animation keyframes, you need to either export the animation. If it's the active camera, you could just export that animation. But if it's a side camera, not one that is part of view, not the main one, then you'll need to synchronize it. So view sync, even though xStream is supposed to eliminate its use, it's actually extremely useful. And even though it says it's for infinite, view infinite, it actually still works with xStream, because xStream and infinite are basically the same application, except xStream will run as a plugin within Cinema 4D and Max and Maya, Softimage, XSI. and even Lightwave. So now what we could do is either close this out. I'm going to go ahead and just save it with camera 4, which is now animated, and just kind of see what happens to the main camera. Reload scene from file. And now we have our new camera 4. And if we take a look, we can now see that animation in motion is carried over. It has also generated a keyframe for every step along the way. Every single frame has a key, and they're also a little messed up. If you take a look, we have a little bit of jittering showing up and shaking in the camera. This could be caused by the keep level option. Let's go ahead and take a look at editing the object. Actually, we'll go to object properties and turn off the always keep level. And it doesn't look like that was the cause, so it's probably just a bad transfer. Really, that's not the way you want to bring motion files in anyway. Vue does have export capabilities for camera motion, and they're going to work a lot better than this. So going back to the edit object, we can see the camera manager, which also gives us the list of the available cameras in the scene, and also allows us to switch between cameras, which right now appears to be working. But now, when I go back to edit the object again, or object properties, this tab shows me that Vue is about to crash. So stay away from editing and using the manager because it will cause some issues at least at the moment. Maybe in the future you'll be able to switch those every once in a while. If there's an update, you can give it a try, see if it works, but don't do it on any scenes that actually need to be saved. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. Close all, close Vue, close xStream, just to avoid the crash, since I know it's coming. Anytime you are unable to edit objects, if they're selected, typically means that it's not working properly. And either you need to close out the entire program, or you can just close out xStream, reload it. Closing xStream doesn't always entirely close the plugin, unfortunately. So if you really need to clean it out, just close Cinema, reopen it, and then don't touch Vue if you're not using it. And we're just going to take a look at one last thing having to do with cameras and rendering within xStream, or using Cinema with xStream. And that's basically any camera will render the scene. Although the settings for the cameras, some of them will work, some of them won't. For the most part, perspective is used and is the default. Because Vue is an environment plugin, you don't need to use the Vue camera at all. If you want to only set up your own camera for rendering, you easily can. It will always render the scene correctly from any camera, as long as it's one of the compatible projection modes. And you can see, of course, Cinema has a lot of different modes, but only certain ones work. The main camera from Vue is available primarily for using it in the standalone and being able to edit your files and preserve that information. It's not required, although you cannot delete it. If you delete it, it will just recreate itself. So basically, if you're not going to use it, just kind of leave it alone. You can turn it off from the OpenGL and just kind of forget about it. Maybe you could even set up layers so that it doesn't display if it annoys you that much. let's go through and take a look at which modes work and which ones don't. We'll just add an object in here to have a reference. And I'll just add my construction plane to increase my grid size. And always make sure you're in that object mode in order to apply any deformations to the proxy objects. So what I'm going to do is open up pictures, and we're going to select our camera. And of course, perspective view and projection is going to work. Parallel also works. If we go over to isometric, we can use the isometric camera. Although in this case, it looks like it cut off half of the object. And if we take a look in the 4 viewports, we can see that the cameras actually move below and really it's more of the placement. Go ahead and lift that up, and it's still cutting off half. So that one is probably not fully compatible. So for the most part, it's perspective that will work, and it does seem like parallel works, although it does look like it's possibly cutting off a bit of the scene. For the most part, you'd really be using perspective only for these kinds of shots. Some of them tend to work every once in a while, depending on their positioning. The top mode, provided the camera is above the scene, will sometimes work. We can see that showing up, working pretty good. So mainly you want to stick with the perspective view.